So Mimi Onuoha is a Nigerian-American artist whose work deploys choice moments of seeming absence to question and expose the contradictory logics of technological progress. Through print, code, data, video, installation, and archival media, Onuoha offers new orientations for making sense of the gaps that define systems of labor, ecology, and relations. Onuoha's recent solo exhibitions include Bitform's Gallery and Forest City Gallery. Her work has been featured at the Whitney Museum of Art, the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, Mao Jihong Arts Foundation, La Gaieté Lyrique, Transmediale Festival in Germany, the Photographers Gallery, and Neon, among others. Her public art engagements have been supported by Academia der Kunst, the Royal College of Art, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Princeton University. With that said, I'm happy to pass off to Mimi and let her give her talk.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Let me just, I have share screen. I have the ability to share screen, right?
Yes, Mimi, you do.
Beautiful. Okay, let me just pull this up. Great. And great. Okay, so all of you can see, I hope, a photo of an orange wall with some cables coming down it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Great,
Yes.
okay. Perfect. So then that leads us into my caveat, which is that I can't see the chat. So if anything goes wrong, I need somebody to speak up and let me know. So if I'm speaking too fast, if I cut out, anything happens, please just feel free, whoever can, just speak up, tell me. Okay.
Mimi, yep, you're all right. Feel free to continue. I'll be monitoring the whole thing.
Beautiful. Thanks, y'all. Okay, so this is an interesting moment to be presenting to y'all, or to all of you here, because literally as of this week, many of the ideas that I'm showing you here in this presentation have evolved. They've changed a bit. That's what happens, you know. I have a friend who says that documentation never can keep up with code, so you have to document in your code, or another way of putting this is that the world is its own best model. This is just to say that the presentation doesn't always keep up with the work. So I say this because in terms of this presentation, I'm asking for a bit of generosity from you today. Maybe you're less audience than normal, you're more people I'm sort of working these ideas out with. Okay, that's my main caveat. Those were my two main caveats. And so now we're going to get to it. We are eventually going to work up to explaining this piece that I have on the screen, but we'll get to that at the end of this. This is a presentation in 3 parts. The third part is where I will explain a bit more about this piece. And with all that, I'm just going to go ahead and start. Part 1, it's called What is Missing is Still There. So to begin with, I want to start this all off by saying that I have always been drawn to absence. I like places that don't show up on maps. I like information that can't really show up on charts. And I like everything that doesn't fit. Everything and anything that doesn't fit. And I like missing things. There might be nothing that exemplifies my obsession with absence more than this piece, which is called the Library of Missing Data Sets. The Library of Missing Data Sets is a physical repository of those things that have been excluded in a society where so much is collected. Missing data sets. This is the term that I have for blank spots that exist in spaces that are otherwise data saturated. My theory is that wherever large amounts of data are being collected, you'll find these empty spaces where you can't find anything at all. These are things like the number of civilians killed by the police, which used to be a missing data set and isn't anymore. But other examples are the amount of cash that is outside of the US, the number of folks who are illegally placed in detention centers, miscarriage rates in the US for before the 1970s. Number of people living off lease in New York City. Reliable counts of Romani people worldwide. Total count of the number of Indigenous and First Nations women who have gone missing in Canada. And the list goes on and on and on and on. This piece is about those things that aren't collected. And it shows this in this way that seems almost plain, bureaucratic, easy to dismiss, this white filing cabinet that is filled with these folders. Each folder has this tab, and the tab has a missing data set on it. And in presenting the work this way, I'm trying to mimic the plain and bureaucratic way that certain things are excluded from data. So I made this piece in 2016. And after I made it, it went on to be shown around the world. It still is being shown right now as we speak. It's shown it's in a show here in New York City, which is where I am. But everywhere that it is shown, I changed the data sets that are within it. I changed them so that they match the people who are in the place where it's being shown. So when it's being shown here in New York, a lot of the data sets have to do with New York City and with the US. If it's shown in the UK or in Brazil, then the missing data sets will have to do with that. I did this because I wanted it to have a sense of specificity, and I wanted it to be able to speak to people across different places. I told you this piece was made in 2016. In the time since, it's gone on to be featured in magazines and TV shows and so on. It has done really wonderfully. But the whole time, though I was happy with it and proud of it, I also had the sense that there was something that I was missing, actually. I think I felt like I hadn't quite gone deep enough, like there was more that the piece was pointing to. And I don't think the sense had to do with other people. I did have to be in conversation with folks who kind of missed the point of the piece, people who wanted to fill the missing data sets or buy the missing data sets. But that wasn't really the issue. I think when you make an artwork, it ceases to be yours entirely, and that's not an entirely bad thing. No, so my issue wasn't that. My issue was that I felt like there was something that I was missing, and I was the one who had made it. So what I did is the same thing I normally do in situations like this, which is I made a new version of the piece. In my work, I have a lot of different versions of pieces, and I make them when I feel like there's more packed within a work that I still have yet to uncover myself. So in 2018, I made a new version of this piece, which was called the Library of Missing Datasets version 2.0. The second version of the piece is very similar to the first one. It's the same size cabinet, it's the exact same type. It's still a filing cabinet filled with files. But what is different is that it focuses on a different type of information. This one focuses a lot on Blackness and data about Black people in a very Pan-African sense. Data that is disproportionately out of our hands. And that also is the reason for the other way that this piece is different, which is that it's gold colored. I was trying to tease out here this idea of wealth extraction of what happens when you don't have control over the information that's about you, which is information that can go on to be used for commerce or control or for wealth generation. I have to say, I really loved this piece. And I liked how it brought out a different note from the Library of Missing Datasets, because it got at this idea of power and ownership and control, this fact that data collection often happens on someone else's terms. But I still had that sense that I hadn't quite scratched the itch, that there was still more to the topic. So a few years later, I made a third version. And this one, the Library of Missing Datasets version 3.0, was a complete departure. This one was, well, not complete. It was still a filing cabinet, but it was a different type of filing cabinet. And this one had the very important difference of it being locked. So there were still files and information in it, but the information in it was intentionally private. And the reason for that was because making it public could be harmful to those whose information was contained within that. So this piece, as I said, it was locked. No one could access it, not even the gallery. And with this work, what I was learning about was when it makes sense to withhold information for the sake of protection. And when I was done, I had this trilogy of artworks, and I thought that together, they were even more powerful than they had been individually. put together, they teased out these themes of access and of power and of missingness. They had been made over the course of 6 years. So they involved so many different parts of my life and also of the landscape of data collection, which had changed in that time. And I liked this trilogy of pieces quite a lot. So much so that I did not want to admit to myself that I still felt that squirming feeling, like I hadn't quite managed to get to the other level of it. But that was a feeling I could ignore, so I did. And I made other pieces that were interesting and beautiful, and I got a job and I packed the feeling away and I moved on. At least until the summer of 2020. I'm sure all of you remember this time. It was the height of the pandemic, days of absolute confusion. It was a time of clarity, but also a time of just complete chaos. I was living in New York, and amidst all the COVID wildness, there were these widespread protests that were happening against police brutality, for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for so many others. And in the middle of all of that, I wrote this essay that ended up being published in 538, just an online publication about data. And the essay was called "When Proof is Not Enough." So here was the idea behind it. During the protests that had taken place across the US, this 2020 protest I was referring to, many people had the idea that it was technology that had really sparked them, that had made everything possible. And the way that that whole story went was that technology, and specifically cell phones, had made it possible to view things that otherwise people would not have been able to see, specifically the brutality of these killings of unarmed Black people. And presented with clear evidence through technology, what logically followed was that it was the presence of this evidence that had been enough to pull people out to the streets. That was the story. That was the way it went. And I didn't believe that at all. I didn't believe it was true. I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it because I knew it was wrong. Throughout the US's history, there have been countless forms of evidence that have been presented as proof of structural racism and of police brutality. And in the article that I wrote, I listed some examples. One of them, just one, was this. It came from 1951 when the Civil Rights Congress wrote an entire petition exposing the US racism to international audiences and connecting it with the US's strategies of foreign policy in the rest of the world. The CRC created a list of all of these examples of violence and of racism that had happened in the US, but specifically of police brutality. Like I said, they presented it to the UN. There were tons of examples, and in the article that they presented to the UN and nothing happened, I should say. So this was just one of many examples of the moments when constant proof of violence had historically not been able to change anything. And in the article, I just dove into this and I teased it out as much as I could. My main point being that I didn't want anyone to confuse the most legible artifacts, cell phones and technology, with being the most significant for these protests. Usually when I publish something, I leave it alone. It's stressful enough to get something written and published that I actually don't read it for a while. But this piece was different. In the time after I published it, I reread this essay over and over again. I put longer and longer gaps in between each of those readings. And each time that I reread this piece that I had written, I found that new lines would jump out to me. And slowly, over time, I finally began to understand why I had had so much discomfort with the limits of the library of missing data sets. So there are missing things, missing data, blank spots that exist in these spaces, things that have been excluded, information that's been excluded in a society where so much is collected. But then there are unknowable things, these collectively unknowable things that are information or reality that can't be known, but not because they're wrong, or false, but because they're too true. And to know them would challenge the foundations of the society that you live in. Classic example is Galileo, who we have pictured here, the 16th and 17th century Italian astronomer who worked across science and technology and many other fields. In 1633, Galileo wrote publicly about the validity of the theory of heliocentrism. This was a theory that had been advanced by Copernicus almost 100 years before. It's the idea that the Earth and planets revolve around the sun, which is at the center of the universe rather than side, the sun being the one that moves around the Earth. And when Galileo wrote about this, the Catholic Church convicted him of heresy and they put him on house arrest. Today, we know that this is true. Why was he put on house arrest when he was just saying the truth and he wasn't even the one who had come up with it in the first place? Well, the answer to that is that regardless of whether the fact of heliocentrism was right or wrong, it invalidated the order of knowledge of the time, at the time that the order of knowledge of that time that the Catholic Church was deeply invested in protecting. And when I say this, I'm not like drawing any conclusions or doing any fancy research, putting things together. The church said it themselves at the time. If the earth moves, it would vitiate our entire plan of salvation. Vitiate means destroy or spoil. There's also the example of X-rays. X-rays, when they were first created, were thought to be some kind of elaborate, I said created. X-rays, when they were first discovered, were thought to be some type of elaborate hoax. They were discovered in 1895, and at the time, they shocked the scientific community. And the reason for this was not because they were new, but because they had been unnoticed by the cathode ray equipment being used by scientists at the time. The very equipment that scientists were using to make sense of the world was this cathode ray equipment. And this was the same equipment that actually emitted the X-rays, which meant scientists had been looking at them the whole time, but just hadn't been able to see what they were. It also meant that if the scientists themselves had been wrong, then they might have to redo experiments from the past that they had already completed. So they would have to reopen to questioning ideas that they believed they had laid to rest through the scientific process. So this is what the unknowable does. It comes into conflict with the deeply entrenched expectations, usually expectations that are advanced by those who have a great deal of power or regard in society. And it's the nature of this conflict and the power of those expectations that really makes these things still remain unknowable. And of course, final example, police brutality, which is tied to structural racism. This is what my article had been saying from the beginning. The extent structural racism has still really an unknowable fact that is inconsistent with the US's understanding and presentation of itself. And that's one that it is heavily invested in protecting. So nearly any system of knowledge creates its own unknowable things. And those who breach it can expect to feel like Sylvia Wynter. She says in this quote here, if they are right, then everything I'm saying is wrong. But if I'm right, I cannot expect them to accept it easily. And this was about the point when I realized that I am not just interested in missing things. I'm also interested in the collective realities that are locked away from a group's shared understandings, because to understand them would be to rock the core of who that group presumes itself to be. So I'm interested in the unknowable. And most importantly, I'm interested in what it takes to make it known. Part 2. Make true things known. Here's what I think. The unknowable hides in plain sight, but it's protected. It's locked behind walls that have been built up over time to block it. So in order to make it known, you have to break through that protection. You have to make visible the very road that you've been traveling on. You have to take something that is familiar and you have to render it strange anew. And this is about when I started to get into archival footage. I like archival footage because it says the subtext out loud. I think any system of values, knowledge, hierarchy, or relations, it lays the foundation for its own unknowable things. And media created in that system is encoded with all of that context of unknowability. So when you have archival media, it's like you have a time capsule of all the assumptions of the day. And then, because the current moment you're in is a different one, you have this space, the archival media introduces just enough distance to produce a sense of dissonance, which then makes it possible to see your own world differently. It's easier to see this with an example. And example I'm going to use is one that affects everyone, no matter who or what we're talking about, which is an example that is around food, specifically the production of food. What I have here on the screen are 3 quotes from Earl Butz, who was Secretary of Agriculture from 1971 to 76. The first quote says, "Food is a weapon." The second one, "Get big or get out." And the third, "Plant fence row to fence row." These are the 3 quotes that Earl Butz is probably the most famous for. The first one is referring to the global power in being able to produce huge amounts of food. It's pretty straightforward. Earl Butz said, this is a weapon. The ability to be able to produce food at scale is a weapon. The second quote is kind of your standard encouragement of the growth. Well, no, the second quote is maybe a little different. The second quote says, "Get big or get out." And this was really Earl Butz's mission. He wanted to encourage the growth of big corporate farms over smaller enterprises. And then the third one, "Plant fence row to fence row." This one is a bit more like standard maximization of space. So really also maximization of captive forms of production. So the background to all of this is that around the 1970s, there were these fears of food scarcity that really reached their height in this time, though they began earlier through the so-called Green Revolution that began in the 1950s and 60s. They were fueled by this idea that population growth was going to be a huge issue that would need to be dealt with. At present population growth rates, world food production will have to double by the end of the century just to maintain the present inadequate level. This quote from John Hannah really synthesizes those fears around population growth and the amount of food that it would take to feed everyone that were really rampant through the 60s, 70s. So this was the fear that the political administration and agencies at the time were worried about, the threat of there not being enough food available in the world. So the US threw itself into increased mechanized industrial food production, which was made possible by applying new technological methods to the growing, harvesting, and packaging of food. And in that moment, no one really questioned this assumption of population growth, which would prove to be correct. And no one questioned that the assumption that increased production through technology and big agriculture methods was the only solution to that problem. The clips that you can see here in the background are from a recent work of mine. They are gathered from archival footage that is taken from the US Department of Agriculture, the USDA, which is the same department that Earl Butz worked for. And what they show is this myth of the US's survival residing in its ability to increase industrial agriculture technology, and how this myth conveniently allowed for reproductions of some of the same labor dynamics as had existed in earlier times, even though these same labor dynamics were wrapped in the veneer of new technology. So if we were in person, I would show you a little clip of this piece that also played the sound. As it is, I'm not going to, but I'm going to tell you that what happens in this clip. This is actually an interactive, I'm gonna explain the piece to you. This is an interactive piece. People interact with it on the website. You change the clips by clicking on the website or by advancing on it. And then in the background, there is this kind of laid back soundtrack, this groove that really lulls you in and that gets you into the sort of rhythm. As that groove is there, then you start to hear these voiceovers that ring out over the track. And the voiceovers are taken from other archival footage that I gathered. So I programmatically grabbed and assembled all of this. And really what I'm trying to do in it is to make the myth apparent. I'm trying to make it visible, make it so that you can feel it, make it so that you can see this dichotomy, the way that We're using these new technologies, but reproducing some of the same dynamics. And which, when you hear the voiceovers for the track, which promise these just fantastical things, which today we really can tell have led to some of the same issues that we face with just industrial agriculture. I'm trying to make it so that this doesn't feel academic. It feels like something that you can feel. I'm trying to make it possible to know right now what was hard to know then, which is the kind of work that myths perform when it comes to the technological. The title of this piece, by the way, is 40% of food in the US is wasted. And that is that's a present statistic. Well, the full title is 40% of food in the US is wasted. How the hell is that progress, man? And that last bit is taken from one of the voiceovers. But that first part, the statistic, that is a present statistic. And it is also taken from the USDA, which is the same department that was one of the largest proponents of this industrial agricultural revolution. In all accuracy, the full statistic is that 30 to 40% of all food produced in the US is wasted each year. And the absolute irony of this is that in the 1970s, people were trying to double the production of food. And that has been done. We've been able to actually increase food production, but we've done it just to arrive at a place where nearly half of that food, up to almost near 30 to 40% of it, is wasted. So there's an unknowable fact here, which is that in our vastly unequal world, feeding more people is not just about production of new food, it's about the distribution of existing food. But to know that would invalidate the power of the story of unbridled technological development, which is attached to just global and market dominance. I say all this to say that there's always a myth, a narrative, a story that I think works to block unknowable things. It's a story that's comforting to believe, one that serves multiple interests and therefore feels very firmly locked in place. And in some ways, that agricultural truth is beginning to be able to be known. It takes a long time to build up the walls that protect unknowability, and it takes just as long to tear them down. But years of efforts from organizers and food laborers and farmers and NGOs and even the UN have caused a kind of opening. But this is an uneven process. And even as those walls are being torn down, they are also being rebuilt. And here's the proof. Here's a present quote from one of the largest insurance companies, which is tied to many of these food companies as well, which says by 2050, the global population is expected to hit 10 billion people. That means that to feed everyone, it will take 56% more food than it is produced in the world today, according to the UN's environmental program. We reproduce the exact same logic. So this process of making true things known, it's not easy, it's not obvious or straightforward. How do you convince someone that a narrative isn't the full story, that it isn't just what they might like it to be, especially if there's no incentive to listen, or especially if to believe that could just destabilize the world as they know it? I'm asking this genuinely. I told you at the beginning that I'm very much in progress on a number of different things right now. And one of the things I'm working on is a project which has stalled in some ways, precisely because of this question of the unknowable. In my project Ground Truth, I'm working with a team to create a machine learning model that can predict which counties in the US hold hidden graves from the practice of convict leasing. Convict leasing, for any of you who don't know, was a period of forced labor that took place in the 19th and early 20th century. It took over after the end of slavery, but it encoded a lot of the same, if really it encoded even worse, racialized forced labor dynamics. What prompted this whole project was the discovery of one of these mass graves in my hometown in Sugar Land, Texas, back in 2018. And when this grave was discovered, everyone in my hometown, myself included, was shocked. I think there was a sense that in this sleepy little town called Sugar Land, that this kind of gruesome thing, how could this be possible? But the strange thing is that actually we had no reason to be shocked, because it was obvious. Our town is littered with the history of this period. from the physical infrastructure to the names of the streets and landmarks. The names that they bear are the names of the same people who are behind these exact systems. And even with all of that passive evidence, even before the grave was discovered, there were people who had publicly spoken up to say that it existed. This is one of them, Reginald Moore, who constantly would show up at these school district meetings to say, there's a grave here, there's a grave here. We should do something about this land. People are buried here. He was not listened to. When I learned about this, I thought to myself that the only reason, what happened was that the school, well, I should rewind, I should say that Reginald Moore was not believed until the local school district started breaking ground on that same place and discovered this grave. And what they discovered was the evidence. They discovered the remains of people who had been buried there. And once they did, that became a sufficient enough form of evidence for people to realize, oh, there's something here, we should do something. And there were many things about this incident that struck me, but one of the ones was that the school happened to have been able to dig and see this grave, but what would it have looked like if you hadn't been able to? Well, then no one would have believed it at all. And so I came up with this project as a way to leverage the seeming precision of machine learning. I figured I could make this model, given that you can't dig it all over the US, but it is very likely that these sorts of mass graves are all over the US. I could use this model to try to predict the likelihood that they were in different counties. And it was, I should say, an impossible model. It is and would be mathematically sound, but at the end of the day, it could only gesture to the fuller story. All it could do was say the counties that were likely to contain them. It was no map. It wouldn't be able to point to where to dig. And it would only be able to talk in terms of likelihoods and percentages. It could not contain the full story, but I thought that it could be like the remains of the Sugarland 95, those people discovered in the grave. It could be a form of evidence that could be trusted. It could be a form of evidence that could be listened to. But very foolishly, I didn't consider that the very same forces that made those graves hidden in the first place would be reflected in the data that we needed for the model. It is hard to find the data that can be used for this model because this is a topic that was long overlooked by academic literature. Histories of US institutions that just simply remove any mention to the practice because of the local historians whose interests lie in positive arcs about their town rather than the grislier violence of these stories, or because of the long time lack of incentives for discussing such information in public. It's not very fun, it's not very sexy. In short, what has impeded the progress of the project are the same structures that blocked my original knowledge of the Sugarland 95 in the first place. Unknowability cuts across so many different spheres. I don't know why, after having done a whole series of work on missing data, that I had to learn that unknowability would creep into affecting this very data set as well. This is a video of me calling different counties, trying to get this information. So we're blocked by the same wall. And I shouldn't have been surprised. You know, all those folks I mentioned, all of whom tried to make unknowable things known, most of those stories are colored by failure. Talks about Galileo. He eventually apologized and revoked what he had said about heliocentrism, even though it is true. Structural racism continues to exist in the US. It's gotten better, of course, but continues to exist and to be denied. And as for the X-rays, well, one of the story of the X-rays comes from The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, written by Thomas Kuhn. And he talks about this fact that what really made people believe it in the end was not necessarily that other scientists were convinced, but because of the opponents who held a different worldview basically dying out. So the odds are not good when it comes to making unknowable things known. So I guess the question is, what is the path forward for this? Part 3, attuning. Now, this is the part that I think I might be the most uncertain about. But this is also the part where we can begin to talk about that photo I showed you at the very beginning. Not quite yet, though. This is a photo of a friend of mine, Okwe. And Okwe is a fantastic performer, choreographer, artist, many things. And Okwe, for a long time, has done these things that she calls soundings. And soundings are kind of exactly what they sound like. It's people coming together and making sound, just making sound together. It's not like singing. I mean, it has something in common in that people are all making sound together, but it's not really like singing, because in singing, the point, of course, is to sound good. You're trying to create this pleasing harmonic sound. And that is not the point of soundings. Soundings are about just connecting. They're about coming together in this strange and intimate space. And they're about just finding each other through sound. So for a long time, Okwe had done these soundings. She had done them on her own, and she had done them with others. She had done them in person. And during the pandemic, Okwe came to me because she wanted to do them online. And so she talked to me because she wanted to see if there was a way that we could talk about what it meant to do these soundings, which were so dependent on people sharing space together, to do them together, to do them in an online space. And so we came together and we led these sounding workshops online. They went well, but what we found is that in order to get them to work, what we needed to do was not really introduce people to sounding so much as we needed to get people to let go. We needed to get people to clear away. We needed to get them to let go of their judgment, to make space beyond it, to let go of the sense that they were doing something completely weird, something so strange, something that made them uncomfortable. We had to clear something away more than we had to bring something there. And lately I have been thinking that when it comes to the unknowable and to making true things known, that perhaps it's a bit similar, that perhaps it isn't so much about convincing people of a thing as it is about breaking down what gets in the way of the knowing. So now I want to show you a piece that I have up right now. It's an installation. This is up right now in Berlin. It's called, it's two pieces actually. It's called The Cloth and the Cable and These Networks in Our Skin. And in this piece, which it features this installation, it has these cables, it has that have cloth wrapped around them, and then it has a video. And in the video, there are these women, and they are working together to cut open these cables, to take things out of them, and to put new things into them. These cables are meant to stand for the internet. The whole thing is meant to be this sort of allegory for thinking about the very technological infrastructure that is around all of us, that encircles the globe like great veins, like a great circulatory system. And to think about what it means to refigure it, to change it, to clear out, to put in new things. And in the piece, what I'm doing is putting in spices and cloth and hair and things that have to do with my own tradition, as it's from where I'm from. But the idea is not that that is the only way of doing it. It's just what I bring to it. The idea is that maybe there is something to do, that there is something in this refiguring and this moving things around and taking out and putting in that can actually get us to knowing things in a different way. I have the sense that when something is rendered unknowable by a paradigm, then you need more than just the tools offered by that paradigm to get out of it. And this is why I speak of pulling things from my own culture, but I say that it's not the only way, that maybe there are many other ways of doing this. And so now what I'm trying to do is to think about the unknowable in this way, in terms of what are the other things we can bring to it that will help us see it differently. And when I say see it differently, maybe what I mean is just be able to see it and to hold it. And I think really this maybe is what I'm searching for with all of this. When I was drawn to missing data sets in the beginning, it was never just about the data. It was about what the data said about that thing, the systems underneath, what they said about what it meant to be in a world where data had this kind of power. And I think when it comes to unknowable things, perhaps it's quite similar. That maybe making sense of these becomes a way to see actually the system that we are in a bit differently, and to be able to intervene in it and change it and remake it in ways that are open to more of us, or to all of us, or to different fluidities and flexibilities and ways of knowing. I don't know, like I said, there's a bit of uncertainty here, but this is what I'm building towards. And really, more than just the installations or the workshops or the talks, what I'm building is this openness to hold different things, to hold the things that are challenging. And then that flexibility and fluidity of knowing when to switch between different ways of knowing and different ways of being. And while I don't know where that's going to lead, I think it might be okay to start from a point. I think what I keep learning is that it's okay to start to know the point that you're starting from, but not know the point that you're going towards. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all. I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to show the slide because I just want to make sure I show some credits.
Well,
Great.
yeah, thank
Okay.
you for that performance, Mimi. Kristen, are you still around? Let's see. So what we're going to do now is move into Q&A. I don't know if Kristen had any comments to add about it, but if she does, she will let me
Beautiful.
know.
Okay.
For now,
All right, good. Brian, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mimi.
Yes. Yes, can you hear us? We're going to open
I can't hear
for Q&A now.
Oh, hold on, y'all. Hello? Can
Hello,
y'all hear me?
Hello?
Okay,
Yes.
now I can hear you. Oh my goodness. I was like, wait. Oh my God, has no one heard me this whole time?
No.
Definitely heard
God.
you.
Wow, okay.
Thank you so much. We are going to open it up for Q&A now.
Yeah, so if there are any questions for our presenter, we have the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to put those questions in there. For some reason, if you prefer chat, that is also open to you. Send those along as you think of them, and we will respond. Thank you.
And if you don't have any questions, that's fine too. That's absolutely cool.
Yeah, 4 o'clock on a Friday. It's,
It's a little rough.
We do have a question, Mimi, from Kelly. So what inspires you most today?
What inspires me most today? It's funny. The hard part, Kelly, the hard part of that is the today. Like, I don't know what inspires me.
4 o'clock on a Friday?
Right now. Yeah, 4 o'clock on a Friday. But inspires me is taking a nap. Yeah, I think that I like the question because I don't know. Okay, I would say there are two answers. One is a kind of simple one. I feel very inspired by really anybody who is creating work that is about creating work that seems a bit impossible, creating work that is against the odds, creating work that feels like you are trying to bring about something new, even though that's a very challenging task. So this kind of willingness to fight a challenging battle, I think I'm always really inspired by, and I think so many, of course, there are a lot of artists I can think of that do this, but I think that actually unfolds across so many spaces, across organizing and policy and research and so on. So I find that in general to be very inspiring, as well as I find specificity or kind of honesty and connection to the specifics of a situation, a context. I'm always inspired by people who dive deep. Yeah, I'll leave it at that actually.
Well, great, because we just got a second question in for you. So this one's from Ro. So as there are more of us who want to put novel things into the cable, perhaps the internet,
Yes.
there must be others who want to control who can and cannot do or want to maintain the cables as they are now. How should we view this issue?
I can't tell you how you should view it, but I can tell you how I view it. I think a lot about structures and systems. I think a lot about the incentives of a system. And what I think about is how a lot of the systems that we have there's a real, when I think about a system, I think not just how does it work, but what maintains the way that it works. So when you say that there are people who are against that, that is 100% true. But then I like to go deeper and say, well, why? What is it that they are protecting? What is it that they're actually maintaining? And then what does it look like to pull away at that? I think that the reason why I say that this is helpful for me is because I think that it allows me to think, it allows me to feel like I'm more at the source, because it's easy to fall into being like, there are the heroes, there are the villains, there's this and that, but also there are the ways that kind of guide how people behave. And if you can change the ways that guide, if you can change the incentives of a system, actually that can do far more than trying to convince individual people or having to feel like you're fighting individual people. Now, don't ask me how it is that you change the incentives of a system. That is the bigger question that I can't tell you, that I feel like I'm often grappling with myself.
Brian, did you see there's a question in the chat as well?
No, I didn't, but let's go
Here, I
to
can read that one. It says, I'm amazed at how differently you think. Wow, you're a genius. What did you want to grow up to be when you were a child?
Oh my gosh, what a question. Oh, wow. You think it's a simple question, but the truth is, as a kid, I really could never figure out what I wanted to be. And I really only very recently have let go of my the way that makes me feel, I would say. I think as a kid, I never knew what I wanted to be, but I knew what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was to try to make sense of the world around me so that it could be different. And I think that when I was a kid, I wrote a lot, and I wrote a lot of like fiction and poetry, and had a lot of friends online who I would share it with, but I never thought I would be an author or I didn't think I would be an artist. I think what drew me to the space of art is that I think of so many of the fields, it just has the most latitude. As an artist, you can do so much. You can make a film, you can write a text, you can do things that are with people, you just can do everything, and nobody really blinks. Nobody bats an eye. People allow you to do it. And so I think that's how I ended up in the arts, is that I felt like it was the place where I could take all of the things I was interested in and I could slot it into something that was more culturally legible. But even now, I am an artist, and I have no issue saying that. But I do think that in some ways I'm a bit of a different artist and even when I have to explain to people what it means that I'm an artist, and they're like, do you paint? I have to say, no, I don't. I like it, but I don't do it. That's not what I mean. There's still that bit of friction. And so that friction that I feel like from when I was a kid, and I'm like, I don't know what I want to be, I still feel a little sense of it. I think I've just come to peace with it.
Thank you for that, Mimi. So now next we have a two-part question. So question one, I guess it's just two questions. Could you elaborate on the relationship between the fluidity of humanity and the structured nature of industrialized society, and how this tension informs your creative expression?
Great. Can you read that one more time, Brian?
Yes, it's a bit of a doozy. Could you elaborate on the relationship between the fluidity of humanity and the structured nature of industrialized societies?
Yes.
And then how this tension informs your creative expression?
Yes, I think this tension is kind of at the center of a lot of the creative expression, because I think what would be, I think whoever's asking, you already know about you talked about the structured nature of industrialized societies. I think you already know about that. I suppose the relationship between the two is a difficult one, because I told you, I think a lot about structures, and I think a lot about categories, and I think a lot about classification, these tools of structuring, the tools that structure, the tools that standardize, the tools that make things so that they are neat and able to be easily grasped, easily reproduced, easily abstracted from, etc. And the thing about this is that I don't necessarily think that it is all bad. Bad is not the word. What I mean is that I think it is a task, or it is an approach that is very well suited to a certain type of work. The problem is that I think it's an approach that has been over applied in too many other spaces. And it has been also held up as the only approach that matters. It's like this piece, the work I was telling you about, the project with the graves, how we have to think about what are the forms of knowing that can count as evidence. That was a thing we had to think a lot about in making the project. And part of it is because there is this form, this sort of structured nature of industrialized societies, and of much more, I would say, that nature is so powerful. It is the form of evidence. It is, you have to put something into that form. This is, I think, why I was also so interested in data. You have to put it into that form for it to carry weight. And because of that, it almost erases the fact that there are things that it's very helpful to put into that form. So now the fluidity part. To me, the fluidity is not necessarily just another approach that refuses the top-down bureaucratic imposed grid for a more like loose structure. That is one approach, but the real fluidity is knowing when to switch between these different approaches, is knowing when actually we should use this more structured, more precise way of approaching the world, and then when we should switch and say, no, there's something here that cannot be grasped, and that is the point. There is a different way. We need to enter this through a more sensorial form, or we need a different way of approaching it. And that's, to me, when I think about fluidity, that is it, is how do you switch between different forms of approaching and making sense of the world? Because all of them are ways of making sense of it, and we do need to do that, but it is how we do it and which ones we use, and whether we have a hierarchy with them or we allow them to be in this more beautiful relation. That's the thing that I want more.
Thank you, Mimi. That was awesome. So next question. So looking forward, what future projects or themes are you excited to explore in your art? Are there new mediums or technologies you plan to incorporate into your practice? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for these questions, everyone. The talk I've given you now, I told you, the map doesn't always fit the territory, or the model doesn't always fit the world. The talk I've given you now is actually, in a way, an earlier version of, one of the things I'm doing is diving a bit deeper into this question of unknowability and refining it a little bit more so that it can actually result in a whole body of work. So there's a lot of work I'm doing around that. Another thing that I'm doing has to do with the piece I showed, that machine learning piece with the graves. I don't know if that piece will be able to be done in the way I had originally intended it to, but already it's led to many more interesting places. So I have a lot of work that will come from that. And then I'm in residence right now at Cornell Tech, and I will be working on them. I'm working on also this third sort of, it's really almost like I'm creating more of like a magical realism world, but that also involves using a lot of AI, like specific models too. And I'm working with a lot of the tech folks there. I will be working with them this year to create that.
Thank you. And now from Maris Longmire, you provided several examples that point to evolution of projects over time. How do you know when a project is finished?
Yes. I would say that in the long term, I never really know, but in the short term, it is just a feeling. I think of it not unlike my partner is a journalist, and one of the things that we have to talk about is how to be a good journalist, you have to build this sense of knowing when something is a story. You have to be able to sift through all of the world in front of you, and then you hear something or you stumble upon something and you say, that's a story. And I think there's something really similar with the arts, where knowing a hunch, for me, it's always a hunch that leads me towards a piece. But then sometimes there's a sense of, I feel like I've wrung all that I can, like I've squeezed out all I can from this for right now. So I need to set that away. And so in the short term, it's like, this needs to be closed. I don't know why, but it needs to be. It's really more a sensation. I feel this way with some of the work that I've talked about today, actually. Some of them are coming to a point where something is closing, but there's a longer narrative, there's a longer arc. And along that arc, actually, when I close something, it's not because it's done, but it's because it's going to be some of the ideas, the things I learned from it will be remixed into something new, or will be advanced upon or played with or reorganized. So that's a long answer for really what is a very short answer, which is that I don't know. I don't know other than just feeling it.
Yeah, projects are hard. Yep.
You know?
I think we could all feel you there. So that was the last one we had in queue. If anyone has any additional questions, any more thoughts on their minds or comments to make, feel free to post them in chat or Q&A. Yeah, and we'll take them. Or if we're all done, we can wrap up and have a nice end of the nice Friday workday. All right. In the meantime, while people are thinking about that, I am posting basically our copy pasta survey. So if anyone has any recommendations for future events, things they'd like to see, input on this event, you can read all of that. Oh, except when I paste it wrong, through the link. We also have information about the Research Commons. So if you're on campus and you'd like to keep up with us, we have events available through our public site, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with us. And we look forward to hearing from you all in the future. You also get a follow-up email from us. I think that was in the copy pasta. Basically with any resources that Mimi, you would like to share with us to share out to everyone who attended. Maybe that website you mentioned sounded interesting, the interactive one. So I might pick your brain on that one after the session. But yeah, other than that,
and then also just want to note as well that this was in partnership with the Steam Factory. So Michael, if you want to put any links in the chat as well for the Steam Factory, feel free to do that for our or for our guests who might not be familiar with the Steam Factory. So this was, again, a presentation that was in partnership between the Research Commons and the Steam Factory. And Mimi, we are so thankful for you being here with us today and presenting. This was a fantastic presentation. And I think everybody really enjoyed it. So thank you.